Hello and welcome. I'm Stuart McCullough. I'm the CEO of the Victorian Hospitals Industrial Association. This is the second broadcast of the Victorian Hospitals Industrial Association, where we delve into greater detail into issues that are of interest to VHIA members. Joining me today is Principal Consultant Tim Nagle. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Stuart. Good to be here.
Now, last week we had a surprise under the box. It seems only appropriate that we should continue that tradition, having set it up last week. So could you describe for those people who are not watching this but are listening to this as a podcast, what you see under the box?
I don't see afternoon tea. There's nothing. I only see the table.
So when you say nothing, that is in fact a tribute to the band Men Without Hats, who in 1983 had a top 10 smash hit with their song The Safety Dance. Today we're going to be talking about safety. Seems only appropriate that since last week we had a cake with a candle that we couldn't light for occupational health and safety reasons, that we should continue on with that theme and talk about the occupational health and safety provisions of a range of agreements. Many members will be aware that they have, or all members will be aware that they have occupational health and safety obligations. Some may not be aware that there are provisions in industrial instruments that go to that issue.
Well, that's right. We know that occupational health and safety matters are an allowable matter that can be incorporated in enterprise agreements. So our experience is all the agreements that we've seen do have those provisions contained within the agreement.
So just by way of reference, I know the expired mental health agreement has two separate provisions for occupational health and safety. The medical scientists agreement, the one that's expired, has an occupational health and safety provision, although it only seeks to apply to 4 different workplaces, which seems somewhat inadequate in that form. The Health and Allied Services agreement has OH&S provisions, and of course the nurses agreement.
That's right. And as you know, through the last enterprise agreement, there's a lot of time spent on those occupational health and safety provisions.
The expired nurses agreement had a provision at Schedule C for occupational health and safety, so it's not new to the agreement as such.
No, that's true. What we've done is we've built on the current or existing provisions, and really to adapt them to some of the challenges that the industry faces currently.
So we're really talking about the provisions in the new nurses agreement that are found in Part K of that document, which has a number of clauses that are around OH&S. If we could start with the first of those clauses, which talks about an industry OH&S working group.
Yeah, so this clause establishes that occupational health and safety working group to focus on some key challenges in the industry. In terms of the purpose of that is to provide some recommendations to health services about 5 key matters. They are manual handling, which continues to be a challenge in the industry.
So manual handling, from memory, manual handling remains the biggest source of injury for nurses.
Yeah, so soft tissue injuries, back injuries, these are the sort of things associated with manual handling. And obviously with a large nursing workforce, it's still one of those challenges that we've got to face.
So if that's one of the priority areas, what are the other 4 priority areas for that reference group?
So the other 4 priority areas are rostering, safe rostering. There was a real flavour through the previous negotiations of fatigue and fatigue management in our workforce. OVA, so being occupational violence and aggression, we know there's a lot of challenges around that in the industry.
So just with regards to occupational violence and aggression, it is very much a topic that's on everybody's mind at the moment. One of the things that I note from that clause is it's not simply about the subject, it's about the prevention of those things occurring, and that seems to be a theme for those provisions.
Yeah, it's about trying to get in early. We know that prevention is much preferable to managing the outcome of those incidents. So a lot of the focus is about prevention.
So that's 3 items. What are the other 2?
So the other 2 are bullying, which continues to be a challenge, and also not only for our sector but across sectors. And the final one is education for managers, being NUMs and ANMFs, around different processes such as work cover, things like this where they play a key role in assisting our employees manage those sort of outcomes.
When we're talking about nurse unit managers and midwife unit managers, we're really talking about a key role within the organisation that ensures that the steps at the unit level that are relevant to safety manage to happen.
That's right, exactly.
And in terms of the composition of that working group?
So it will have, so the VHIA is representative employers, it will have the ANMF, It will also have the Department of Health and Human Services, and importantly it will also provide for guests and expertise from the field and outside of the field to be involved in that process to make the best recommendations possible for the information for the health services.
One of the things I note about that clause is that it makes an express provision that to state in our case and in the case of the ANMF, a representative may be a member.
Yes, that's right. Yes, so I mean, there's so much expertise within the field around occupational health and safety. We really need to be able to leverage off that expertise for this process.
I think if there's one thing that we're extraordinarily mindful of, it's the need to have an expert at the table for those discussions.
Yes, agreed.
And that committee is intended to convene within 3 months and then meet on a bi-monthly basis.
Yeah, that's right. It will also provide reports back to the field in terms of progress, and again the final outcome is those recommendations for the field.
And in terms of the other provisions there, in terms of OH&S risk management and the identifying of a range of risks and processes in which to eliminate those hazards at the source, that's a separate provision of the agreement?
Yes, and look, a lot of what that clause says is what health services do at the moment. And that's in the recognition of hazards and the management of hazards, and then through the continuous improvement cycle to ensure that those hazards are managed in the most appropriate way possible.
And in terms of the hazards that are listed, there is some degree of consistency throughout these provisions as the same issues are identified from different perspectives. So we have safe patient and manual handling, we have occupational violence, we have bullying and fatigue, and other safety issues such as unsafe design, as well as things that are perhaps traditional hazards that people are used to, such as needle stick injuries, slips and falls and the like.
That's a really good point you make, because the clause also points to some external documents as well, such as work safe guidance notes, the ANMF 10-point plan, and they all really do focus on the same sort of issues over and over again. So, I mean, we're advanced in that we know what the hazards are. It's about now putting in process to help manage them.
One of the focuses for that part of the agreement concerns the reporting of incidents, investigation and prevention. Obviously this year we've had some major reports that have come down with respect to both workplace bullying and for occupational violence in terms of the VHIA reports, and there's a fairly significant theme with regards to those matters around reporting and under-reporting.
Well, there's significant under-reporting. I think if we can take anything out of 2016 is that we have a real under-reporting issue that needs to be addressed. Within the new nurses agreement is a provision that really specifies that as an issue and encourages employers to do something about it. And it's really around changing the culture, moving towards more a reporting culture.
It's interesting that you refer to culture as being an important element with regards to occupational health and safety. And we were talking before about the fact that there's a focus on prevention, which really lends itself to the idea of a change in culture. The other interesting thing about those VHIA reports is acknowledging or recognising that some events that may have gone underreported because people didn't recognise them as being acts of violence or aggression, that culture needs to change.
Yes, it's a real educational focus and an awareness issue that goes with the underreporting. As you say, if people aren't aware of that or recognise it as a problem, then they're less likely to report it.
So obviously the focus must be on prevention.
Yes.
And not simply reacting, but at the point that there is an incident, the role of incident reporting is critical, but reporting an incident of itself is not enough.
No, well, it's really about the actions you take after that issue has been reported. So and it goes through the range of actions that are required, such as supporting the employee who reports. I mean, they're obviously being recipient of an incident, so they need to be supported through that. And then there's an investigation process to try and recognise what the incident was about, what was the cause of the incident, for the purpose of trying to prevent that from reoccurring in the future.
So one of the specific provisions of this part of the agreement concerns occupational violence and aggression, prevention and management. In terms of that particular provision, what was really highlighted for me was the way in which that clause begins, which is a statement that employees are entitled to a workplace that is free of occupational violence and aggression.
And I really think that sets the scene for the flavour of the clause, is that this is what people should be expecting, should be what we're aiming for.
I think the key word is entitled.
Exactly, that's right.
And in terms of prevention, that same provision goes on to talk about the need for a focus both at an individual health service level as well as an industry level.
So the industry level really is dealt with by that Occupational Health and Safety Working Party, but there's also actions to be taken at the local level as well. So the agreement requires employers without a current occupational health or OVA policy to introduce one within 3 months of the agreement. Now, most employers will already have such a policy, but it's about making sure that everyone does. So from the certification date, people have 3 months to introduce such a policy if they don't have one. The second thing it does is that it requires health services to have an action plan as well. Now, again, most employers will have an action plan to deal with OVA. For those who don't, have 6 months to introduce such a plan.
Just on that issue of having to do things both on an industry and an individual level, there's something of a theme that's really emerged during the course of this year in particular, and it's true in those VAGO reports and in a number of other reports, in that there are instances where there are 86 different health services, there are instances where it's an industry, and that there's good practice that occurs within the industry, but it's about how to make that a more consistent how to achieve a more consistent approach across the entire sector.
And part of that will be about transferring learnings, and what we're hoping through that Occupational Health and Safety Working Group is to capture some of those learnings so that we can transfer that to other environments.
Tim, there are a lot of references in these provisions to the ANMF 10-point plan. Just for those members who may not be familiar with the ANMF 10-point plan, given that it's a necessary action to make sure that the action plan is consistent with that document, perhaps we should go through those items, but I suspect they're going to sound very familiar to most members.
Yeah, look, that document really outlines what everyone knows already, but it just puts it into a plan. So there's no new items in that list, but it is well worth looking through them.
So in terms of that list, the first item there is about improvements to security. The second was to identify risk to staff and to others. And again, these are things that are repeated throughout these provisions, and they're consistent throughout, including family and the development of patient care plans, reporting, investigating and acting, preventing violence through workplace design. And I think that's a really interesting one in terms of thinking about the opportunities for a safer workplace, really at the design or redesign phase for those health services that are going through a process of refurbishment. Providing education and training to healthcare. There was an interesting observation in the Occupational Violence VAGO report about the difference that training makes with regards to reducing risk.
I think training's got a key role to play in that, because it's not just about the individual's responses, but it's about the coordination of the team to be able to respond to an incident.
Integrating legislation, policies and procedures, which really goes to the issue of treating this as a global issue, both and as an industry matter, as well as focusing on individual health service issues, to ensure though that there is some sort of holistic approach to that issue. Post-incident support and anti-violence approach across all disciplines, which I find a really interesting, a necessary thing to say, but a really interesting thing to say. It's really a statement of the obvious to say that violence doesn't stop with a particular occupation.
No, and it needs a coordinated response, and the different occupations within a health service all have a role to play in that response.
I recall seeing a study that suggested that particular occupations outside of nursing were being overrepresented in terms of some of those incident reporting or some of those violent events. It just goes to underscore the importance of taking a whole of health service and a whole of industry approach. Also empowering staff to expect a safe workplace, I think, is the final item on that 10-point plan. But as you were saying, those items should not be a surprise to anyone, and to a great extent they represent the orthodoxy that's developed within the industry. But one of the benefits, I think, of including those provisions in the enterprise agreement is ensuring a consistency of standard and a consistency of expectation across the industry.
And I think if you also go to the WorkSafe guidance notes on the subject, it's very similar themes. I mean, as you say, those themes are across all the documents, across all the different agencies that are involved in occupational violence and aggression management and prevention.
There are also some obligations under those provisions with regards to committees and ensuring that certain designated committees are responsible for acting on the development of policy and the action plans, and also more interaction with the ANMF, more so than people might be used to.
Yeah, so in terms of the requirements to implement that policy and also the action plan, and also have a continuous improvement process around both the action plan and also the policy, the agreement requires that the responsibility for those actions to be attributed to a particular occupational health and safety committee, and that can be an existing committee. But as you say, the ANMF also have a right to attend those meetings as well. I mean, this is about a collaborative process to try and improve safety within the workplace.
Collaborative and transparent. Transparency, I think, is a really key issue in terms of this, in terms of how to handle this issue. In terms of the other thing the provisions do state is that the ANMF are able to request and receive certain materials from the health service as part of that discussion around the occupational violence and health and safety policies.
Yes, I mean, at the end of the day, what we need to do, and it's part of the developing that reporting culture, is to build up a picture of what is really occurring. Because unless you get that picture of what's occurring, that's going to be very difficult to intervene. So part of that transparency and part of that open culture is the sharing of that information.
We were speaking before about the frequency of meetings and the obligation for that to occur on a regular basis, which really leads to another key factor with regards to these provisions, that it's all about continuous improvement. That is, it's not a one-off event, it is an ongoing process under which improvements are being sought.
And that's exactly right. I mean, that is the benefit of having these processes, is that over time they will continually get better and better and better.
So hospitals live and breathe continuous improvement. It's in their DNA, and they're certainly accustomed to doing that across a range of issues. So in that sense, the way this provision is written is consistent with practices that hospitals are already familiar with.
That's exactly right.
So recently you attended a meeting of rural, regional and metro OH&S managers. Just in terms of I take it that this clause was probably discussed in part, and the obligations. Was there any feedback from that group with regards to the OH&S provisions of the new nurses agreement?
Yes, I was very lucky to be invited to their conference this year at St Vincent's, in which they had a number of guest speakers attend and present. And I did get the opportunity to talk to them about the nurses agreement and the interaction between the enterprise agreements and the occupational health and safety laws. The reception was it was very well received. I think there's probably a lower level of awareness about the provisions in the agreement from that group, only because they're used to dealing with the legislation. And really what the message there was is they work hand in hand, both the legislation but also the agreements as well, and they're really trying to achieve the same thing, maybe slightly through different angles.
So there's certainly a role for VHIA in 2017 to interact with that group on a more regular basis, ensure that they receive information and support with regards to the obligations under the agreement, but also to involve members of that group, particularly with regards to the industry committee.
And they're really enthusiastic about that engagement. As you know, we've got a meeting with them early in the new year to start planning out activities and how we're going to work with that group through some of these clauses and how they're going to be actually operationalised. So that's really exciting for us, I think, and from their reaction, exciting for them as well.
Well, look, thank you, Tim. That's all I wanted to raise with regards to that particular subject. All that remains for me to say is, both to you and to those people who might be listening or watching, Merry Christmas. I should say that I have drawn you for the Kris Kringle, and you're getting a CD. It is Men Without Hats. I don't want there to be any surprise.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Tim. This is your weekly VHIA update. This week at VHIA, the public holidays matrix has been completed and it has been issued to members. Thank you to those members who participated in the quality assurance process following the announcement of the government to make an additional public holiday over the Christmas period. With respect to the Nurses Agreement, we've been requested by the Fair Work Commission to provide some additional information with respect to the ballot. That information will be submitted to the Commission on the 7th of November and has been prepared in consultation with the ANMF. In addition, the implementation guide for that agreement, which will be a useful tool for the workplace implementation committees, has been posted on the VHIA website and is available by utilising the My IR and Your VHIA login. With respect to the Allied Health Professionals Agreement, an implementation guide is currently being prepared for that document also and is being provided to VAPA for comment. Once that's completed, it too will be posted on the VHIA website. The Allied Health and Allied and Managers and Administrative Workers Agreement has, as you know, been the subject of a successful ballot. That agreement has been lodged and we are still awaiting a hearing date for that particular agreement. An implementation guide will also shortly be available with respect to that once the necessary consultation process has occurred. With respect to some of our other negotiations, the Mental Health Agreement, whilst the negotiations have completed, we are still drafting and finalising the drafting for that agreement, but that drafting process is proceeding at pace and in a very positive spirit. There is, of course, though, still the issue with respect to industrial action, which we know is having a significant effect for some members. Members of the reference group for that agreement were provided with a detailed update as to the steps we're undertaking around that industrial action. With regards to the Medical Scientists Agreement, which had a later nominal expiry date of 31 October, we have continued our negotiations with the MSAV and that matter is still progressing. With respect to doctors, we have now received a log of claims from the AMA with respect to doctors. We've had a meeting with them as a preliminary matter, but we have another meeting scheduled for the 12th of December, the purpose of which will be to talk in greater detail with respect to those claims, after which we will convene our reference group and start getting responses from members with regards to those AMA claims. As for maintenance, that remains really at an early stage. That is, we are yet to receive a log of claims from those unions, notwithstanding that we've had some preliminary meetings. This is the last VHA Weekly Update for 2016. We'll be recommencing these broadcasts in late January 2017. I'd like to thank all those members who participated in reference groups or filled in a survey or attended one of our meetings. The contribution that members make is an important part of what we do, and I'd like to wish all members a very happy Christmas and New Year. Until we speak again.